balance in Chinese is two symbols. The first symbol is danger and the second is opportunity.
So if we drill down into this concept, this polarity of yin and yang in Chinese medicine, I had a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. How am I not living to my fullest potential and life purpose? But how I simplify that for a Western audience is really with just 2 words.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Katie Deming, and this is the Born to Heal podcast, where we discussed holistic healing through lifestyle, nutrition, emotional balance, and spiritual alignment. Let's welcome Brandon LaGreca to the show.
Thank you, Katie.
Welcome, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your podcast.
It's so nice to have you. I just want to jump right in here, and I want to know from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, what causes cancer?
Yeah, that's the big question. And as you say, I'm coming from a different lens. I mean, my native core is in traditional Chinese medicine. So I've worked as an acupuncturist and herbalist and teaching Tai Chi and Qigong and all these different, art forms and modalities from China for the past 20 years. And so we think about things a little bit differently. And, I'll answer that question in reference to cancer, but I'm going to take a step back and just say philosophically, in terms of Chinese medicine, we say there's really only one cause of all disease. And that is quite simply being out of balance with nature and natural rhythms. And that should be fairly obvious. I mean, most people know on an intuitive level, for instance, that you can't go sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night after night and eating junk food day after day and not expect something to break in your body. So there's a certain way that we have to live in alignment with certain principles. And that's kind of the crux of what it means to be healthy on a lifestyle level. But then it gets a little bit more nuanced. So if we drill down into this concept, this polarity of yin and yang in Chinese medicine, we think of saying, well, where did that imbalance come from? And, the yin is the internal and the yang is the external, right? And those designations in their most original form in Chinese medicine, the character that implied those concepts was the north and the south side of a mountain. So everything that's on the south side is hot and dry and bright, and everything on the north side is cool and damp and so on, and dark. And so the yin and yang is the most basic polarity with which we discuss, things that are happening from one realm, in this case, yang outside, and one realm inside. And so for most people, how that shakes loose is there are internal causes of disease and there are external causes of disease. So with that framework in mind, when someone asks me what causes cancer, I actually hear at least 2 and up to 4 different questions within that. I'll give you the 2 basic ones, which remarks to this concept of yin and yang. So what causes cancer, right? We could say fundamentally an imbalance with nature and natural rhythms. But if we were to drill down from that, the 2 questions that come up to me is how we get cancer and why we get cancer. And those are 2 different questions. So on the how side, which is what we would say in Chinese medicine is the yang component, the external, my answer to that is very simple. How we get cancer is from exposure to carcinogens, right? And carcinogen, by definition, means something that causes mutation in the body and hence, cancer as a disease process. But that doesn't explain why we get cancer, because we're all exposed to carcinogens, right? And so the why is more the yin, or the internal aspect. And for that, Chinese medicine is extremely clear on this point. They say from this internal perspective, all disease arises from an imbalance with the emotions in the body, either suppression or repression of emotions, and not the proper expression of emotions. And so how I simplify that, and we can get nuanced in here and talk about the different emotions and the organ associations and the cancers that follow. But how I simplify that for a Western audience is really with just 2 words: stress and trauma. And that's kind of the internal piece. So that's the how of cancer, the why of cancer. Then we can go on to discuss the where of cancer, like where it shows up in your body and the resonance with certain emotions and the meridians of acupuncture. And then there's even a 4th question, which is who gets cancer, which speaks a lot more to personality and constitution. So all those are kind of built in within this larger framework of Chinese medicine of how we think individually, on an individual level, why this person is getting cancer, how it's developing in their body, where it's developing in their body. So you can see there's quite a bit more nuance to that question.
I actually just love that framework, the way that you explain that and the questions, and breaking it down into how we get cancer, that the yang, exposure to carcinogens, and then the why we get cancer, the internal aspect of it. Like just that alone, I think is helpful for people thinking about that. I'm wondering, you started to talk about the fourth question, like who gets cancer? I think that is one of the things that most people wonder. They're like, okay, why me? Like, who is that person who gets cancer? And I'd love to have you talk about that, because that's a question that is on, most people's minds when I see them, is like, why did this happen to me? Why was I, susceptible to having this grow on me when, someone else might be exposed to the same thing and not develop cancer?
Absolutely. And here I think there's even a Western notion of what can be under the hood, and that is the research into type C personality. Now, we've known about type A personalities for a long time, and those are people who are more prone to cardiovascular disease. But a type C personality is someone who's more prone to cancer. And it has many hallmarks, but I'll tell you my favorite, which I identify with the most, is being a people pleaser, right? Kind of putting yourself out there and not maybe having very good boundaries. And so that's kind of the little bit of the personality type. But in Chinese medicine, we think more in terms of constitution, right? And here too, we can use these concepts of yin and yang. There's the person who's more robust, a yang constitution. They're usually warm all the time. They're very active. Maybe they have a louder voice. And then there's kind of the yin constitution, which is maybe someone who's a little more quiet and meek. Maybe they're a little colder, always needs a blanket, that kind of thing. It tends to be more the yin type that gets cancer, but it could be the yang type as well, because, there's just variance in there as well. And of course, the yang type, the type A personality, those are the ones that are more prone to cardiovascular disease. So this is all kind of wrapped up within this greater notion of constitution. We're all very different, even siblings in the same, household. They may grow up with the same circumstances, but they come in with a different genetic predisposition, we'll say. And so all those things, and it could be, again, we can pull in biochemistry here. We can say that someone who has GSTM1 deletions and they're not making as much glutathione, they have a sluggish liver, right? That's kind of like a constitutional type. And maybe that makes them more prone to environmental carcinogens. So however you slice it, any of these different lenses we can take, constitution does come into the picture. So we shouldn't ignore it. We shouldn't just say, there's just cancer and the people who get it, and there's nothing in between those two, right? We definitely want to look at all the variants within each one person's constitutions. And then this is the yin of the kind of the why of cancer, is how do they cope with stress? How do they manage their stress? And, what was their exposure to trauma, right? So that's a really big, there's a difference between stress and trauma in Chinese medicine, but that's a really big subset of what we're exposed to, right? That is maybe creating the seed of cancer within our bodies, if that makes sense.
I've discovered one tool that has completely transformed how my clients heal, resetting their metabolism, activating the body's natural healing, and giving them incredible mental clarity. That tool is water fasting, and you can access my free workshop all about fasting as a healing modality right now. I cover how fasting actually works in your body, the different types of fasts, and how to know which approach is right for you. And most importantly, I cover how to do it safely. Whether you're navigating health challenges, have tried fasting before, or are completely new to it, this workshop is for you. I'll share real success stories from my practice and give you the framework I use with my clients. You can watch it now by accessing the link in this episode's description. This workshop could change how you think about healing entirely. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And so, this idea of the type C personality and the people pleaser is 100%. I mean, it's not data in my practice, but anecdotally, I can tell you that is who I see. Those people who are always taking care of everyone else, doing, what other people want them to do, ignoring their own needs and making sure that everyone else is taken care of. That's definitely a theme that I've seen throughout my practice in my conventional medicine, and then also now in my integrative practice. And I'm wondering though, because this is, something where people are like, yeah, that is who I am. That's how I've always been. And oftentimes then they'll work on, having clearer boundaries and learning how to take care of themselves and figuring out what their needs are, because I often find that people, they've lost touch with what are my needs. I'm so focused externally on caring for other people. But you said something in there about how they cope with stress and manage the stress and also their exposure to trauma. And how does the coping with stress play into that in this, constitution, being more prone to cancer? Can you describe what that looks like? How do these people who are more prone to developing cancer cope with stress?
Absolutely. So first, I'm going to define those terms a bit, and then I'll kind of circle back around to your question. So the way I think about, I'll give you an analogy, the way I think about stress and trauma being a little differently. If you think of the calmness of your life as being like a pond, and we wanted it to be still, stress is like throwing little pebbles in there day in and day out. They kind of erode our resilience. Trauma is a little bit differently. It's the big rock that displaces water. So trauma needs a fundamentally different treatment in the sense that we have to find strategies and such that bring the water back in. When it comes to stress, we think of the just, removing whatever that input was, if possible, not always possible. And so we have to grow stronger in the face of that stress if we can't remove ourselves from it. And so this is where the constitution piece comes in, because as you say, this more type C personality, they're more prone to just take it, right? They're not as much to have their good boundaries as we might wish them to. And so here I come to what I think is, for me, one of the central lessons of cancer. What I feel most strongly about to communicate with my patients is I really think it's a game of restoring agency within a person. And this is something that I most broadly call the anti-cancer mindset. It's how we think about cancer, how we think about being diagnosed, and what we do with that, how we grow from it. And so if we use cancer as a teacher in the sense that it helps us to see the patterns in our life, to see where those imbalances are, and then pivot from there and to grow stronger in the face of them, that's what I'm most after when I talk with the patient. In some ways, I'm a little bit more on the agnostic side in terms of what a patient wants to choose in terms of their therapy. And for several reasons. One, I'm not an oncologist, right? I'm a holistic practitioner, and the oncologist is the disease expert. I'm the health expert. I want to be there for the health of the person. And so I get people that are going to come in to see me in various different states of what they feel good about. Some people, it's going to be they're going to go full on, conventional oncology, and they want me to handle the side effects. I have some people who want nothing to do with conventional oncology, and I would say the majority of people who want some blend. They want to do some form of integrative work. And for me, I tell them right at the get-go, I will 100% support you no matter what you choose. That's not my job to be making decisions for you. But what I most want is for you to get behind whatever you do choose, right? I don't want you waffling. I want you to get your heart and your head behind it. And in that moment, if I can get them to see that, that's where that restoring of agency comes in. They feel their own empowerment, they move forward, and they're so much more likely to get the best outcome from whatever they do choose. This is the difference, and you say this very eloquently recently in your podcast, the difference between curing and healing. And I think that's a brilliant podcast. Everyone should listen to it just to realize that curing is what the doctors are interested in. Healing is what we are most interested in as individuals and as families and as communities. It's really bringing this full structure to why we're here, why we're doing this. And that's the whole empowerment piece. So what I'd say ultimately to your question is, yes, we're all born with certain constitutions, but that is also our greatest gift in order to grow and to learn. And we can certainly think of cancer in that lens.
Yes. All of that makes so much sense for me. And this is why, recently I've shifted my practice to water fasting, is because it's one of the most powerful tools for people to get quiet, get clean, clear themselves out, and then really see what are those imbalances. Actually, we had a conversation today on our fasting call about how one of the fasters, she was describing that she's now on day 10, I think. And, in the first week, they're really crabby and they're, irritable and whatever. And she said, I'm still like sharp. Like, she's like, I feel like, I'm still a little bit irritable, but she said, what's starting to happen is I'm starting to see those things that just don't work for me. And I'm feeling like I don't want to say anything yet because I feel really sharp and I'm not sure if it's irritability or if it's, really something that needs to shift. But the clarity that people get when they fast and they get clear with themselves, and when they start to see, oh, okay, I see the patterns, I see these pieces. And I love how you said that. It's like we can be born with a, type, like that we're, however it comes from, whether it's from our genetics and heritage or the way that we were raised or the trauma that we were exposed to, that we're, develop these patterns of coping, right? Of living. But that the cancer can be an invitation and a messenger about how to shift that and helping you see the imbalances. And this is the piece that I think Western medicine just has completely wrong, because we're so focused on just the disease and eradicating the disease and completely missing that there may be a message here that's trying to show us the imbalance, like show us what is going on here. And, many people say this cancer is a gift, and I think it's hard for people to hear that. But if you think about it as, it's a messenger. It's a symptom to show you that there's an imbalance somewhere. And it may not be clear initially, but getting to this piece of it so that you can, like you said, see the imbalances and then pivot and grow stronger is like the whole game. But this is like the game of life, right? This is what life is all about, is that our whole life is to see where we're imbalanced, pivot and grow stronger. And so cancer is just like life, like, on steroids, right? It's like this ultimate lesson of life. But I think it is so simple, and yet it's missed by, I think, most practitioners who are taking care of people with cancer completely.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And just think, at its core, cancer is, in some cases, right, absolutely fatal. So we are faced with our mortality immediately once we're given a diagnosis of cancer. And so that throws all of that into the works. And so, if someone is in that space, that headspace of, I am just the person that needs to go to the oncologist, I'm broken and they need to fix me, you completely miss the opportunity there to grow stronger. And here's why, right? Let's be absolutely blunt about this. Preventing death is a zero-sum game, right? No one's getting out of this life alive, right? Yes, we have both taken oaths to alleviate suffering in our patients, but preventing death is not the same thing as accentuating life. And that's the role we really need to play. And that's the conversation we need to have in and around cancer. We need to be so comfortable with our own death that we actually become alive again. It's this old saying, when death finds you, let it find you alive, right? We don't want to, because the opposite, to me, is the greatest tragedy. It's not someone dying young. It's someone that dies decades before they really do physically die. They're not living to their full potential. They're just slogging along in life. They're not really being the person on a spiritual level that they're here to be. So to me, I flip it completely on its head. I want to know right at the onset, what are you afraid of? What are your fears around death and dying? How do we bring life back into you? What do you most care about? And all of those things are anti-cancer strategies for me. If I can get someone completely jazzed about what's coming 2, 3, 5 years down the line, then I've got them locked in. We've got vision now. We've got something we're working towards. And that's what I want to see from them. I want to see that life well up within them. We call that the Shen, the spirit in Chinese medicine. We say when someone's spirit is engaged, the prognosis is inherently always going to be better.
That's so beautiful. And you said something in there about accentuating life. I've actually never heard someone use that term, because we always talk about extending life or quality of life, but accentuating life is so like, I love that. It makes me think like, oh, of course, that's what we want to do, is help accentuate life. And the piece that you're saying around death is 100%, 100%, 100% my experience. And frankly, the whole reason why I became an oncologist. So when I was an undergrad, I was studying biopsychology and neuroscience, and I wasn't sure what I would do with that. Now I know you could do anything with an undergraduate degree, but at the time I'm like, oh, well, I guess I could go to medical school or I could do research. And my mom really didn't want me to become a doctor because she was like, I don't think that the lifestyle that you're going to want to live that. And she was a nurse practitioner, and she was really discouraging me because she didn't think that I could do it, but just that she didn't think that the lifestyle was something that would be good for me. And so I was like, okay, well, what's the one thing about medicine that I don't think that I would like or could handle? And it was death, because I really hadn't been exposed to anyone who had died except for a friend when I was in the 4th grade. And it was very scary. She developed leukemia in 2nd grade, and then we watched her just deteriorate. And then in the 5th grade is when she actually passed, but the 4th grade was when she kind of ended up leaving school. And it just was really hard to watch as a child. I didn't know what to make of it, and I didn't understand it. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to sign up to volunteer hospice because that'll be an easy way for me to cross medicine off my list. And as you can see, this story did not turn out as I expected it, right? So as a 20-year-old, spending time at the bedside with people who were facing their own mortality and preparing for their own transition was completely riveting for me. The things that they told me, I was a complete stranger, just a volunteer, but the things that they told me were so deep and so profound, and all of the things that they, would have done differently, and the things that they would think about if they knew then what they knew now. And I was hooked. I was like, I need to be around this for the rest of my life. And I decided based on that experience to go to medical school and specifically go to become an oncologist. And what's so interesting, and this is like not surprising, I'm sure, but I was interviewing for medical schools, and I interviewed at like 6 schools. And one of the schools gave me an interview with an oncologist and a pediatric oncologist. So you'd think like, oh, this person is going to understand, my desire to be around people who are, facing their end of their life and, just their own mortality. And that was really my interest. Was I wanted to be close to that there was something so real and so special and so intimate to be with people who had, a potentially life-threatening illness. And so I met with this oncologist, and he said, I see on your personal statement that you want to be an oncologist. So tell me about that. And so I told him about my experience at hospice, and I told him that it just blew me open and taught me so many things about living that I had never learned, and that I wanted to spend the rest of my career around people who were facing cancer and their own mortality because it's such a special place. And he looked at me and he said, that's not a good reason to become an oncologist. You've got like 12 more years of education. You have to love the science. And I was just crushed because I was like, oh my gosh, maybe this is a bad reason. Like maybe that's not a good reason for wanting to become an oncologist. And so I stuffed that in my backpack, and I never told anyone again until like way later in my career that really it was this connection with what's important in life that had brought me in. Now I realize that there was some truth to what he said. Like actually, becoming a doctor, you get so separated from that intimacy and that beauty and the things that I was learning. But also at the same time, he was so wrong to invalidate that idea, because that is what makes me effective in the space with people who are facing their mortality, because death is our best advisor. And I love that quote. I've never heard that: when death finds you, let it find you alive. And I think, for me, that's what happened as a 20-year-old, is that death found me, not my own death, but other people's death. And it really brought me back to life. And I think that for my clients, the biggest transformations that I see is just like what you described, is when someone really embraces that idea that this life is finite and that I want to live. I don't want to just exist. It completely opens a new space for accentuating life, as you said, and experiencing it. So death for me is like the ultimate advisor, and has always been like such a precious and like space that I hold close to my heart, that anytime that you can be close to someone who's facing their own mortality, it's really, really a beautiful and intimate space to serve.
Yeah. And furthermore, we don't have to wait until we're on hospice to think those thoughts or ask those questions of ourselves. And cancer is like a test run, right? You get that diagnosis and you're thrown into that one leg in, one leg out, right? So, to me, can we start asking those questions now? How am I not living to my fullest, potential and life purpose? Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that cancer is one of those ultimate, the amazing news is that cancer is most of the time not fatal, in the stage that it's diagnosed, but it brings up that mortality, right? It is your opportunity. And I always talk about this, crisis in Chinese as two symbols. The first symbol is danger, and the second is opportunity. And having a diagnosis that brings your mortality to the forefront is the ultimate opportunity to really evaluate your life and what do you want to, what do you want to experience in your life? And then also for me, the biggest guiding light in my life is at the end of my life, I want to know that I lived a life that was true to myself and that I lived fully. I really used all my gifts in a way that was of service to the all, So I think that cancer is that ultimate opportunity. It doesn't have to be stage 4 or hospice or any of that. It can be just even having, an early diagnosis. It brings up all of that for people.
For me, very specifically, because I had a stage 4 cancer diagnosis at some 10 years now in remission, one of the things that very quickly in my journey came to the surface, both now as a provider, is I need to be able to give back. Everything that we've been talking about this last 20 some odd minutes is a culmination of me thinking these thoughts over the last 10 years. And cancer is my perennial, advisor in a way, right? It's my teacher. There's not a single day that I don't get up and think about cancer. It doesn't happen. And so I've learned to take all of that wisdom that I've accrued over the last 10 years and say, let me offer this back to people through my writings, through my interaction with patients. To me, that became my renewed life purpose. Now I have my own internal things, my own internal goals and things I want to, again, live to my highest potential, just as you described. And, one of them, I'll be very frank with you, is when I was diagnosed, I had a 2-year-old daughter at home. And one of my visions for myself was seeing myself as a grandparent, because I know if I did that, I would well outlive my prognosis, right? And so in my meditation space every morning, in my prayer space, I would think about myself being a grandparent. What would that feel like? And so that's, from my internal perspective, being around for her and seeing her blossom and do everything that she wants to do. But yeah, there's a great part of me that says, I've been given so much. I've been given this great education. I've been working with patients in this way. And now I have this personal experience, right? This wounded healer archetype has been thrown onto me. How can I offer this back to people? How can I? And I think to me that a lot of people should ask that same question. You're in this position, right? You've been given this diagnosis. Now, maybe you're not in the medical field, whatever, but there's always something you can give and teach and offer back to people. There's always some way that you can express more appreciation and gratitude and connection and, just be in the world. But wow, what a empowering, beautiful way to heal fundamentally from cancer if you can emerge within that process.
Yeah. Well, and I love that. And your daughter must be 12 now?
She's 12. Yeah. I'm going to be 13 next month.
That's amazing. Oh, gosh. Well, good luck to you. God bless you.
Thank you. I'll take all the help I can get. I appreciate it.
I think it's really powerful, actually, when you have your own personal experience like you do and the background that you have in education to be able to really bring it together in a way that is of service. But one of the things that you said, I actually want to speak to, because one of the things that is, for me, this is interesting. So this is going to be like, I'll be interested to hear what your perspective on this is. But oftentimes people say to me, like, I want to beat this because I want to go show the world. And I want to, be able to show people what's possible. And that for me is actually a big red flag right away, because people are externalizing their, power to the outside, and like, I want to do this to be able to prove that, that I did this, and to show the world. And I think this is my own personal opinion. So I think that we confuse service and using our experience with having to be in. And I know you didn't say this, so I'm just bringing this up because this is something that comes up for me quite often, is that people confuse being of service and using their condition to serve as, I need to be out there on a podcast sharing with 100,000 people or whatever it is, to like show the world and help people in that way. But the one thing that I've really come to know, and even for myself personally, just because my crisis wasn't cancer, my crisis was realizing the medical system was broken and that I had to leave, right? That was like a huge crisis for me. But I had to really get comfortable with, I don't have to save the world. Like, my role is not to save the world. My role is to do my internal work for myself, to be in balance myself, so that then whoever I come into contact with, I am holding that frequency of love and acceptance and unconditional love in a way that affects everything around me. And I think that this is one thing that people miss sometimes in their healing. They're so focused on, how can I get past this so that then I can go tell the world? When the truth is that just by doing the internal work to heal your own imbalances, to heal yourself, the ripple effect of that healing is so profound that that's the most important thing that we can do.
So I'll tell you what I hear when you say that. And I agree with you. The people who have that almost like, I'm going to get out to the world and show them what I've done, it's still coming from that fight cancer mentality, right? It's still, it has an adversary-like feel to it. And having a little kick behind you is great. I mean, everyone needs that at certain times. And that's we say in Chinese medicine, that's a good like liver qi, right? There's good, anger, you can mobilize around anger and you can use that. But the ultimate energy of the liver, of the wood element, anger becomes benevolence, right? When anger is really truly in balance. And so, there's a lot of people who are going to have a lot of great stories, but if their only approach to that and how they communicate that to other people is, I beat cancer. Again, it's going to, for me, missing the point, because it's all external transformation and really very little of the internal, where I think the internal is what takes the lead. And so if they choose, on the contrary now, to have the standpoint that, cancer was a teacher for me. It showed me all the ways that I was imbalanced in my life. And now I'm thinking differently about how I show up in the world. That person will never, get up on a stage and broadcast that to whatever. And not everyone's made for that anyway, right? So if we get away from this, we're going to fight cancer, to more of a principle is, we are going to learn from cancer, that person's going to have a very different paradigm shift within them, right? They are going to see the internal change happen first, and then that external come as an expression of it. Now, again, in my case, it was very natural, right? I was already a practitioner of 10 years when I was diagnosed. I was already extensively writing in a blog. So all those things just naturally matriculated into taking my experience and being able to communicate that well. Well, we'll see, right? As time goes by, I like to think so. So for my humility, right? Who knows? But the bottom line is, those are all very natural expressions of what came out of my experience. Now, it could be, a person who's working a night shift doing whatever, right? They're not going to have the same kind of life experience. So they may just be, they're working at a diner and telling people about how they rose, to see cancer as their teacher. And they may only see one person here and there at a time and communicate their message, but that's enough, right? That's just how it all just trickles down. So We all have our different gifts to share, but yeah, I agree with you. I don't think we should be coming from that fight cancer adversarial perspective at all.
I would say you are doing a good job of,
Okay,
of
thank you.
expressing your views eloquently, and obviously you were positioned in where you, and also for me, like my background positions me to be out in the world speaking in this public way, but I also, because I took a year off after I left Western medicine and really just was inside, I had to struggle with that idea because I had always been so outwardly facing, serving, taking care of people, and realizing though that internal work that we do is also of service because we're changing within ourselves, and that is felt by those people around us and those people that we touch. So absolutely. And I just wanted to get your opinion on that. So I loved hearing that. And I love the tie into the yang energy and the battle language, because I mean, my listeners know this, but I have a TEDx talk that was all about the language of cancer, and that it really, if it serves you, wonderful. I'm not an all or none where I'm like, you can't use this language, but you want to think about the way you're approaching your illness. And if you're fighting something, you're really fighting yourself.
Absolutely. And I think what's particularly interesting about you, Katie, is we look at the culmination of your experience. You've gone into water fasting. I mean, it's hard to get a more internal experience than that. I think, meditation retreats and fasting are about as in touch with your own being as you can possibly get. So curious.
Yeah, I've swung from one end of the spectrum to the other for sure. So I want to ask you a little bit about the hidden role of emotions in cancer.
Absolutely. So this goes a little bit more to that question of where cancer may show up in your body. And so for this, we need to have an understanding of what we call the 5 elements of Chinese medicine. And it's wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And for each of those elements, there are 2 organs that are associated with them. And each of those organs has an emotional correspondence. Okay, so we'll start at the top with wood, which is correlative with the springtime. Okay? So the wood element is the liver and the gallbladder. And the emotions associated there is anger, right? Anger, stress, rage, those kinds of emotions. And so, the imbalance within the wood element in the liver can, of course, then give rise to cancers within the liver itself. But as I go through this list, I want to make one thing very clear is, emotional correspondences, even though I'm going to talk in generalizations, can really show up anywhere, right? And so it's your own individual story. And again, Constitution, which was really going to explore this the most. But that's the wood element. Going into fire. So that is the heart and the small intestine. And the emotions associated with here is anxiety and also like mania. That can be full on like a manic disorder. But just even think of, like a child on Christmas morning, their face is red, they're ripping through presents, then all of a sudden they crash. There's almost like this kind of manic type energy to it. They're just like explosive fire energy. So that's when the fire element is burning really bright and can get out of balance. And here we can have leukemias that come up since the blood has a correlation, of course, then to the heart. It could also relate to lymphomas that are around the small intestine, since the small intestine is the paired organ with the heart for the fire element. Those are a couple that come up around there. The earth element is the spleen and the stomach. So this is all about our digestive strength. It's all about our relationship with our mother. That's our mama, right? And so earth can be related to worry, nervousness, right? That doting mother, right? That's the archetype behind the earth when it's out of balance. And the cancer associations there would be, again, of course, cancers of the stomach, esophagus, of the digestive tract in general, the pancreas, and so on. Moving into the metal element, this is the lung and the large intestine. But this is also a relationship with our father. This is a big one when it comes to cancer because grief, depression are the emotions that are associated with the metal element in the lung and large intestine. Think about even very specifically the large intestine and the ability to let go, right, on a physical and an emotional level. So here we'll see cancers, of course, of the lung and the large intestine itself. And then the last one, which I think really underpins the whole cancer journey in general, is the water element, which relates to the kidney and bladder. And these are the emotions of fear and fright. Now, there's a difference between those two. Fear is, think of it, again, analogy, it's nighttime, you're in the middle of the ocean, it's dark, you can't see anything, and you feel something brush past your leg. It's this looming, like, what's coming next? That's fear. Fright is more the startle, the shock, right? Something that happens to you that has that quick jolt to your system. So the water element is the kidney and the bladder. Those are the two organs associated with it, with the kidney being more that fear aspect and the bladder being more the fright aspect, which is interesting because you think when someone gets startled and frightened, there's like the pee your pants phenomena. That's the bladder energy like leaking out of you all of a sudden. So here we have specifically some gynecological cancers, of course, bladder cancer, prostate cancer, and then also metastases to brain and bone, right? Because those are the tissues that are associated with the water element. So that gives you kind of like a little bit of an overview, but again, realize that there's also interactions between these different elements in the organs. The most classic example of that, which is like the diagnosis for Western patients, specifically Americans, is what we call liver spleen imbalance, this wood and earth imbalance. This is where someone is, angry, aggressive, stressed all the time, and that's impacting their digestion, all the elements, all the organs associated with the earth element, the classic IBS presentation, as it were. So, that can show up in a lot of, again, liver, pancreas, and also breast cancer as well, this liver spleen imbalance. So some of the emotions that kind of go with that as well.
That's super helpful. I think that, that was what I was going to ask, is with breast cancer. So where does that fall in? And so that's liver, spleen.
It could be several. So if the breast cancer is in the upper right quadrant, that has a little bit more resonance with the lung. And so there's that kind of the emotion of grief comes up there, depression. If it's in the upper, that's in the upper right. If it's in the upper left, where it's closer to the heart, there could be ties into, the anxiety around the fire element as well. If it's in the lower left quadrant, now we're getting closer to earth territory, right? Where the spleen is and the pancreas and such. So there can be some pull in from there as well. And then likewise in the lower right quadrant, that's where we're now in the liver dynamic. So it because it's such a large area, you can kind of pull in from these different emotional and elemental correspondences when it comes to breast cancer.
Got it. Yeah, I think that, this is one area where there's a lot of different information, and I think overlapping, but then some of it is different in terms of emotions and cancer and what is the cause and the genesis and the maternal side and, German new medicine and all of these things where people will come to me with, multiple different interpretations of that. And so it's helpful to hear from a Chinese medicine perspective, what are the emotions, what is that connection with the emotions and the element and then the different organs. So thank you for sharing that.
And I think the most important of all is the person's individual story, So I'll give you an example. And here's where I really say follow the metaphor. I'll give you an example. So I had a patient many years ago who was diagnosed with a cervical cancer. And that happened, that couldn't have been even a year or so after her son tragically died. Now I know as a parent, a part of her probably died that day when her son died. Right? I can't imagine the grief and the loss of that. So yeah, even though we say grief, right, lungs and large intestine, when we drop down into the area where she was diagnosed, cervical cancer, think of the metaphor there. She got a cancer in the area that literally brought her son into the world, right? And so that grief, I'm sure, just lodged itself into that tissue, right, in a sense. So we think of like, creating the seed for cancer. So that's where I feel like it's really valuable. So, kind of back up a little bit, we think about breast cancer. There's a huge component of breast cancer, which is nurturance, right? How we nurture ourselves, how we nurture our children. Think back to that type C personality. What are we doing for everyone else, but not nurturing ourselves? That's the metaphor that comes up quite a bit around breast cancer. So, I've looked at German new medicine. I've got Chinese old medicine. So I kind of fall back to my roots when it comes to that. But realize, when we talk to someone on an individual level, we get their story. We hear the things that have happened to them, how they've processed trauma. Where did that trauma lodge itself in their body? And they have answers to this. They can say, I never felt the same since this happened, and I felt it here, right? Maybe when they point to their chest, that will give us so much information in terms of what's manifesting in their body.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it makes so much sense. And I think that that's where sometimes I see people latch on to these particular, like, well, I read this with this, or I saw this practitioner and they said this type of cancer fits with this thing. And then, but then you're like, but does that fit with what your experience and your story? And then it doesn't, right? And so you're exactly right that it's the story of what they experienced and what they, everyone's story is different. And that's one thing that, like, with cancer, I've really come to learn is, like, these blanket where it's like, oh, this means this, is like, no, it's much more nuanced and individualized with each person, because their constitution, like you said, plays into also what happens within their body as well. So, one thing that we haven't touched on is the traditional Chinese medicine roadmap for healing. And I don't know if that's a small topic or if that's like am I opening a giant can of worms for, the remainder of our time? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we covered a lot of it from the standpoint of, I think one of the greatest benefits of Chinese medicine, at least which I've taken away from it, is how we think about disease and how we think about health, right? And so kind of what I've laid out for you in the sense of, when I hear the phrase, what causes cancer, and I break that down into the how of cancer and the why, right? The external, the internal, and even the who gets cancer, and then the where shows up in your body, like we just discussed with these emotional correspondence. That's kind of the roadmap of how illness, comes about in our body. So to me, I would say the first thing is, it's so much more rich than just saying you have a genetic mutation, right? And then furthermore, being, gaslit to say, this is just bad luck, which frankly was what I was told by a lymphoma specialist, is like, this is just bad genes, bad luck, and let us treat you. The Chinese medicine roadmap is, let's look so much deeper about who you are, how you show up in the world, what is your environment like, what have you experienced, the emotions surrounding that. And then once you've created that roadmap, what are you going to do next? What path are you going to follow? And for there, Chinese medicine has its own modalities, of course. We think of acupuncture and herbal medicine and energy work and qigong and all these types of things. But it's all predicated on the fact that you are going to have this rich, nuanced understanding of what's going on and how you're showing up in the world. So to me, like, that is the benefit of Chinese medicine and the wisdom of Chinese medicine that has come over the last 3,000 years. Western medicine, for all its brilliance, and it is, right? If you fracture something and you need to get some surgery from an emergency standpoint, Western medicine has some great solutions for you, and there's great imaging and all this stuff. But to really see on a deep level what is going on all these different levels, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, we really have to look to a traditional form of medicine to have this holistic vantage point. So I would say that's really the richness of Chinese medicine, as in some ways the oldest extant form of traditional medicine, to provide that for us.
That's beautiful. Well, it's been a pleasure actually chatting with you and learning about this, because I haven't had anyone on the show to speak about traditional Chinese medicine and cancer specifically, and also the emotional aspect of it. So I'm so grateful for you coming on and sharing your wisdom. I know you have at least one book. Do you have multiple books?
I've got 3 of them now. Yeah.
What are 3 of them? Okay.
To deal with kind of from a patient advocate standpoint, the role of, so my second book is called Cancer, Stress, and Mindset. So it's really about how stress impacts the cancer journey, and this bigger concept, anti-cancer mindset. And I tell patients that's where you should start. I tell readers that's where they should start, because that's the book that I wrote for someone who's been newly diagnosed. How do I think about cancer, and where do I go from here? And then the most recent book that I published is called Cancer, Trauma, and Emotions. And that one takes much more of a psycho-spiritual lens, and it looks more like things we've discussed here today, like the emotions associated in the spiritual aspect of cancer. And I separated the books for a very good reason. I could have put them all together. But not everyone's kind of ready to take a spiritual journey when it relates to cancer, and they just need to get to the bare bones of what's stress doing to me and how do I think differently. And so for people who need the kind of the Western sciencey, let's just talk about cortisol and stress, yes, that's available to you. But when you're ready for the next stage and going into the spiritual aspect of what you're going through, that's in the most recent publication.
So can you tell us where can people find you?
So, my books are available everywhere online, digitally, and in print and audiobook and such. And then, to connect with me, probably the easiest place is just through my website, which is just brandonlagreca.com. So you'll see my blog there. You can sign up for my newsletter, all the various things, of course. I'm not really on social media. I kind of drew a line in the sand when it relates to that. So you won't really find, I have, an Instagram and Facebook pages that don't get any attention whatsoever. So I really try to be very concerted in my efforts that the people who want to interact with me, I have a monthly curated newsletter where I write, kind of a message there and what I'm thinking about and share my latest blog post. And that's about it. People are busy and crazy as it is. So I figure, let me just give you a little tidbit of what's going on and then go from there. So that's how people can connect with me.
That's perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I think, there's a lot of people would benefit from hearing about this information and then also finding your books. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. I appreciate all the work you're doing and how you show up in the world. So it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here today. Please enjoy a previous episode of Born to Heal. And if you found value in our conversation, please subscribe and share with someone who might benefit. Have questions? Drop them in the YouTube comments or message me on Instagram. Links are in the episode description. Remember, just like me, you were born to heal.